Start. All right, welcome everyone. We are back with another season of the Athletics Canada coaching webinar. I'm John LaFranc. I'm the manager of coaching education with Athletics Canada. Kyle Smith, our coaching coordinator, is in the background. Kyle, you dropped the there it is. Okay, came back. If you have any questions, so Kyle will manage the questions, put them in the dialogue box. We have a very special guest. You can see his picture on the screen there. We'll introduce him in a sec. But just on the housekeeping side, we're gonna have a nice conversation here, just between two Johns. And if you have any questions, just feel free to put them in the question box when they come up, and we'll either address them, kind of as they fit in the conversation, or we'll leave some time at the end as well. Vous pouvez aussi demander des questions en français et je vais traduire pour notre ami américain John. I'm not sure if you speak French, John, but don't worry. If we get French
No.
questions, I'll translate them for you. And we are recording the webinar. It will be posted in the coming days on the Athletics Canada YouTube channel. And coaches who have entered their NCCP number and are NCCP certified will receive 1 professional development point for their participation in the webinar. So here we are. Let me introduce John O'Sullivan. John is the founder of Changing the Game Project, and he's the author of many books. Every Moment Matters, which I read recently twice because it's so good. The Champion Teammate, Changing the Game, the Parent's Guide to Raising Happy, High-Performing Athletes, and Giving Youth Sport Back to Our Kids. And his latest book is coming out next week, October 1st.
October 1, October
October
1.
1, yeah. It's called The Champion Sports Parent. So John has nearly 3 decades of experience as a soccer player and a coach. He's written these books about creating healthy sports environment that enhances both the well-being and the performance of young athletes. And he's all about fostering joy and passion in sports because it not only supports the overall development of youth athletes, but drives their success. And in our case, on the track and in the field, and in whatever sport they're in. And he really believes that coaches, parents, and sport leaders can work together to transform youth sports into a positive and empowering experience. And John, I'm so excited to talk to you and ask you some questions because I said I read your book twice because every time, every page, I was just like, oh, okay. And I love this because, when I read a book, I always kind of think like, oh, I wish I could ask the author this or that. And now here you
Yeah.
are.
Well, thank you,
So
man. I appreciate the kind words and definitely put heart and soul into that book for coaching. And it was funny because it was a little longer than I had told my editor it was going to be. And she was like, This could be shorter." I'm like, you know what? I kind of like it. It's just going to be my opus, and then I can write a shorter version later on. But I wanted to write a book also that had like lots of points of entry. Like you didn't have to read from page 1 straight
yeah,
through. Like you could go, oh, okay, what practice design or learning or team culture, or, you could
yeah.
find different pieces. So thanks.
Yeah, yeah, and the structure of the book is great too because, as you say, each chapter kind of, can be independent, but also within the chapter, the structure is really like, okay, here's what we're going to talk about. Here's some main points, and then there's always sort of very practical things, exercises you can do as a coach with your team or parents or whatever, and then kind of a nice summary, like just really well structured. So it's so much good stuff in there.
Thanks, man.
Okay, so first question, and this is, a quote, and I don't know if it's actually in the book or not, but the feeling is there. And this quote that says, "Athletes don't care how much you know until you know how much they know how much you care." And
Hmm.
I don't know who said this first. I heard it from one of my mentor coaches, Olivier Trudel, and his father, Pierre Trudel, also kind of a big coach in Canada. But I've heard it a lot, and you kind of start with this premise. So what I wanted to ask is, why is it so hard for coaches to let go of the X's and O's and how much they know as the primary thing in youth coaching?
Whew, that's a phenomenal question. I mean, I think first of all, I think the original quote that I got it from was actually like Teddy Roosevelt, is that people don't know how much you care till they care how much
Yeah.
care how much you know till they know how much you care, right? So I don't
Yeah.
take credit for it except maybe inserting the word athlete.
Yeah.
But, the concept is super important. And, I mean, I'm not sure why. For my first decade plus as a coach, I was doing all my certifications and just looking for the magic practice, right? Where's the magic practice that I don't have. And I got to watch, I remember, well, this is going back 10 years or so. I got to watch one of the best coaches in the world, I think, in any sport, Pep Guardiola work. And I'm watching him and I'm like, he's not doing anything that I don't have access to. He's just way better at it than I am, you
Mhm.
know? And what I noticed in that moment was it wasn't, it was the activity, of course, was incredibly important, but it was his interaction, individual interaction with people, letting them know, like, I see you and I see what you're doing, and here, let me help. Very intentional, especially with like younger players as well in the session, and coaching. But his assistants would go out and do the same thing. And so, a friend of mine once said he was like, he goes, I'm worried in coaching in sport, and he was a soccer guy, and he said, we're starting to overvalue all the things that can measure because sometimes it's really hard to measure the things that we value.
Mhm.
And so I think this goes with coaching as well. It's easy to measure the X's and O's and test people on it and certify them. And here's a training plan, and here's the science, and this and lactate and all this stuff. But
Mhm.
it's hard to measure. Have I showed enough caring? Am I a good enough listener? Have I connected enough? And things like
Mhm.
that.
Yeah. So related to that, and so you tell the story of the Belgian Soccer Association, and to sort of quickly sum up, we don't have to go through the whole story, but they were not successful at the international level, and they did a kind of whole big review from the youth sport on up, and what they came to realize is that the kids were just not into it because they were doing all these drills and they just weren't playing soccer.
Hmm.
And it's funny because I'm as we've talked, I'm doing some work with my local hockey association, and I mentioned this to a friend that I coach with in track, and he said, you know, I got into hockey because I watched an Oilers game and it was awesome, not because I watched them practice a breakout or something,
Yeah.
right? So I think, you know, how do we change related to the last question? How do we change the way our coaches think about young athletes in this way and kind of letting them play the game. And in track and field, that playing the game is racing and who can
Hmm.
throw the farthest and who can jump the furthest. And we kind of have this dictum that's a little bit counter to that, which is, no racing in practice. No racing in
Hmm.
practice. You hear that a lot. So how do we turn that around? And maybe should we be letting kids, race and practice more and having competitions and and kind of balancing that with this, reducing this idea of like, well, did we win? Because we want to stay kind of process oriented.
Yeah. I would never say that, oh, let me tell track and field coaches how to coach that stuff because that is nothing I've ever done or understand that. But I do think, getting back to this relationship of, first of all, who's in front of me and what do they need, and why are they here, right? And
Mhm.
so that was the Belgian soccer piece, was, well, kids wanted to play, and certainly in a game like soccer or hockey or something where there's lots of interactions and it's all about, those games aren't really as much about technical skill as they are about understanding space. Right? A soccer player in a 90-minute game has the ball for 90 seconds.
Mhm.
So 88 and a half minutes, they're trying to find the right space on the field and be aware of what's around them. And I don't know what the numbers in hockey are, but I would imagine it's pretty similar,
Mhm.
that they don't have the puck a lot. So, so I think it's really important that we recreate the things that get kids there. And obviously, as people get older and get more serious about it, then they
Mhm.
have a deeper understanding of, well, this is what I need to do in order to be successful here. So I don't know about, I'm trying to think back to, like, I ran track in high school for 2 years. Um, and I'm just trying to think about what practices were like, and I remember not liking the interval days, you know. Um,
Yeah.
but I still think you can do stuff as long as you create a social team environment, right? And then and how do you make it competitive? How do you do that? So I don't know. I mean, it's a hard thing for me to comment on, except to say, ask your ask your kids, ask your people, like, why are you here, what would make you want to come here more often.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, that's great. So on that note of, listening, talking to the kids and stuff, you also talk in the book about, having athletes that will share things with coaches that are quite personal and intimate. Like you mentioned, there's this kid's family was like living in a van or something and just
Yeah.
not a good situation. So how do we balance this with there's sort of a prevailing trend, right, in terms of safe sport and making sure that, our communications are strictly sports based. We obviously want to keep kids safe in that regard, but sometimes keeping them safe also means we have to get to kind of know them beyond sports. So I think coaches ask, like, this is a hard thing for coaches because they they want to develop a deeper relationship with the athletes, but there's a little bit of reticence now because of this sort of idea.
Yeah, it's a really hard environment, I think, to coach right now because of this uncertainty. And because of also, it's not the truth of the accusation that would end your career. It's the accusation itself, right?
Yeah.
They say the lies halfway around the world before the truth gets out of bed. So I think this is it. So what I think we're always doing as coaches is building trust with our athletes and trust with their parents, right? And I like to think of trust as like it's a bank and you want to make deposits, right? Because at some point you're going to have to make withdrawals,
Mhm.
right? Not to break trust, but to really push and whatever. And so, you and I, we were talking before we started here. There's a athlete from Bend, Oregon, where I live named Ashton Eaton, and he was the decathlon champion in 2012 and 16. And I had him on the podcast years ago, and he told this great story about, his trusting relationship with his coach. And Ashton was so involved in his training. He's like, I used to write like a 30-page report at the end of every month of my reflections on the training. And I would sit down with my coach and go through it,
Mhm.
right? And now if he said, "Get the hell out of here, I'm the coach. Just listen to me." He goes, "It would have the relationship would have never worked." He's like, "But he went through it and he would go through it like that's a good suggestion. We can do that." And then like this example he gave me, which I remember, he said, "We could maximize your long jump a tiny bit, but what we would need to do training wise, and that those takeoffs on your right foot, you're
Mhm.
much more likely to injure your calf,
Mhm.
and then you won't be able to do the other thing. So what we want to do is optimize that
Yeah.
and maximize some other things to get your points to be successful." And so as an athlete, he's like, all right, that makes sense to me, right? And so this back and forth and trusting relationship that coach
Mhm.
has my best interest in mind, but
Mhm.
he's not afraid to say to me, well, here's why we're doing this.
Mhm.
That's a really, really important part of it.
Hmm. Yeah, that's a great story. And decathlon is such a good example for that because it is all about optimizing less than maximizing things.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And Ashton's story is super fun. I love his story. It's one of my favorites because when he was a senior in high school, his track coach came over to him because he was a football player and he did karate and he did all these things. And he said, "Hey, Ashton, great news. University of Oregon wants to give you a track scholarship for decathlon." He's like, wow, no one in his family had ever gone to college. He's like, that's amazing. What's the decathlon? And he'd only done three of the events before. So there's
Okay.
if anyone wants to Google Ashton Eaton's first pole vault, he does like a front flip over the bar, at the University of
Yeah.
Oregon. So
Wow. That's impressive.
yeah.
Um, Okay, so the next question is kind of, we hear that and we've talked about this, how, coaching is kind of changing, the environment's a bit different. And part of that is that, kids are changing, I think. So what are kids looking for in a coach? And then the flip side of that, because it's important, what are coaches looking for in not out of kids, but out of coaching?
Yeah. So I always ask coaches, like if we were in a room together, I'd say write down the five qualities of your best coach you ever had. And if you never had a good coach, who was your best teacher? And then, we might put them up on a wall, right? And one wall would be X's and O's or knowledge of the sport, and the other one would be relationships and connection.
Mhm.
And 90% of the sticky notes end up under relationships.
Mhm.
And the higher the level of the athlete, the more likely that knowledge of the sport that isn't even one of the five.
Mm,
because that's not a, when you're going to the Olympics, your coach knows the sport,
mm,
right? So it's all these other things. And the number one answer, more than double any other, is caring,
mm,
right? That they cared about me, right?
mm,
And a lot of people put up demanding, right? So it doesn't mean you can't be hard,
mm,
right? But it's be demanding without being demeaning,
mm.
right? And so all these things go up on the wall, and it's just this really great visual of when we go and do coach education most of the time, we spend 95% of our time on the wall that we just said is 10% of what makes a good coach.
Okay, I'm gonna
Yeah.
stop you right there.
Yeah.
This is I think what the word is like a canard or something.
Uh-oh. Okay.
This is something that people say. Traditional coaching education is all about X's and O's. Not in athletics in Canada, okay?
Good.
We have just done a revision of our coaching ed, and I would say that so if I just kind of ballpark it, there's about 20 to 30 hours of coach education in the sort of the basic like startup, whatever, of
Hmm.
level of coaching. And eight of it is technical, and the rest of it is all relational stuff.
Which is amazing. But
Yeah,
it probably
I
wasn't
mean,
like that a while ago.
yeah, I think it was. I just think that people like to say that to kind of because it's a good sort of straw man to push off against or something. But
Well,
I,
well,
I
I'll throw out like I did my US soccer A license, and this
yeah,
is 20 years ago now. So,
yeah,
and it was a 40-hour course,
mhm,
and it was 1 hour of sports psychology.
mm,
One.
yeah, yeah,
Right.
yeah. I
So,
think
and,
it's
and and to be fair to US soccer, it's gotten a lot better. There's a lot more into
yeah,
team dynamics and things as well. The best course I did, there used to be a course called the National Youth License, which
mm,
really aligned
mhm,
ages and stages of development, their psychosocial, emotional, physical
mhm,
capabilities with what a session would look like to maximize those.
mm.
And that was an amazing course. I was like, now I know the why behind it. So
Yeah.
I take back any insult to Athletics Canada because I've not taken your
Uh,
courses.
it's all good. I think I just want to, kind of mention that because we did just, kind of change things up and it was I think we've added a little bit more relational, but the balance was always sort of like that anyway. Um, and to be honest, like we have discussions and the discussion now is kind of like, we need more technical because we're kind of losing that. And so it's,
Mhm.
there's so much to learn. And I think this is
Yeah.
the other thing is that as a coach, you're not going to get everything in your traditional coaching education course. That's why we're having this webinar because it's
Right.
not, it's a starting point. It's a baseline. And hopefully coaches have this, kind of learning, uh, I don't know, just the need to learn, then and they'll just keep going. And there's because
Yeah.
an hour of sports psychology is maybe good, to kind of start, but obviously you can, you can talk sports psychology for a whole PhD if you want, right? So
Yeah.
I think what people should look at traditional coach education as the entry point, not the okay, I've done it and now I've arrived.
I think it's a great point. And certainly the best coaches I've met on my journey, that would be a common thing. They're all super curious,
Mhm.
right? The end
Mhm.
of a podcast or a conversation, they're like, "Got any good books?
Yeah,
Anything you're
yeah,
reading,
yeah.
whatever." They're super interested in it. And when they're coaching in the NBA or coaching in the NHL or something like that, like they're not like, "Do you have any good books on breakout plays?"
Mhm.
Right? They're like, "I've been looking for good stuff on leadership, or I've been looking for good
Right.
stuff on communication.
Yeah,
You have any good ideas,
yeah,
So yeah, so I think that's important.
yeah. Or it's just stuff on other sports too is really really interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So on that note, I do have a sort of technique question.
Hmm.
You talk about the distinction between technique and skill,
Yeah.
right? And that, we kind of we should be really teaching skill more than technique, but is there a time to just teach technique? Can we teach kind of technique first and then kind of build skill into it? Is it possible that some kids are just sort of too young for skill because they just don't know the technique? And maybe you could explain what your distinction between those two would be.
Sure. And then again, I think this would change in every sport,
Of
right? If
course.
I'm
Yeah.
teaching American football and teaching people to tackle, I might need to teach the technique of where are your head, where are your shoulders, where are you hitting the person before I just say, go hit him as hard as you can, like, but from a safety issue or
Yes.
checking in hockey or whatever, right? So there's obviously a technical component that always matters. But I think the problem, and again, this would be mostly in invasion games,
Mhm.
is is if you separate the technique from the decision,
Mhm.
right? Then what you have is the ability to do something, right? So if I'm teaching passing in soccer,
Mhm.
right? And it's just you and me knocking a ball back and forth. That's not passing. That's just kicking,
Mhm.
right? Because passing is hitting a ball to you at the right pace, at the right time, to the correct foot, and understanding where to move afterwards. And
Mhm.
and also deciding that you were the best person to pass it to in the first place, right? So it's about perceiving information, coming up with possible solutions, choosing one, executing it, and assessing my choice. That's invasion games, right?
Mhm.
So I think um, it doesn't mean I can't say, hey, lock your ankle, do this, do that. But what I can't do is spend 60 minutes on locking the ankle and then roll out the chaos 7v7 and expect that you're going to be able to deploy that in a chaotic environment. And so that's the challenge, is how do we work from something isolated
Mhm.
to adding decisions and direction and defenders and chaotic till I get to the most chaotic thing I do, which is the actual game.
Mhm.
And that's the art of coaching, is doing that. But if I spend all my time on isolated, blocked practice, as they call, doing the same thing over and over, and then expect people to deploy it, that's why you go to a youth hockey game on Saturday and you hear someone yelling, but we worked on this in practice. Yeah, no, we really didn't.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean it kind of goes back to that sort of like playing and game situation sort of scenario, because that whatever that technique is, if you're not using it in its context, then it's not, you're not really learning how to do it.
Yeah.
Um yeah, so I mean I think maybe, just on that concept, coaches can think about some track and field examples and think about how they might want to, maybe just slightly adjust some of the things that they do. Um
Well, there's race strategy.
yeah.
I mean, just there's a nervousness
Hmm.
going up to the race, waiting for the gun to go, that might not be there in practice. So how can I raise the heart rate, raise some of that sort of stuff, or a cortisol level or whatever? How can I try to recreate the environment as much as possible so that the actual race is not the first time they've done it? And this is where like things like visualization and stuff come in too, or as my partner Jerry likes to always say, like feel it, he calls it feelingization, right?
Hmm.
You don't want to just see it, you want to sort of feel it and smell it and touch it and whatever.
Yeah.
And so it's not your first race when the gun goes off.
Yeah, totally. So these we're talking about some stuff that I think, as you said, with Pep, like, high level coaching stuff. But then the coach of the year award always ends up going to the coach who won,
Of
right?
course.
But are they really the best coach, or maybe they're just the best recruiter, or they're in the right place at the right time? And of course, like obviously it requires something to win. It's not to diminish that at all. But how can teams and clubs and sport organizations like us recognize quality coaching in ways other than performance related awards?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, coaches are judged on whether we won or lost. And ultimately, whether we win or lose comes down to, the talent that we have combined with what we're teaching in the environment we're creating and all that, right? So if you win this year, three gold medals because you have all these people, and then the next Olympics you don't win any because those people retired, did you become a bad coach 4 years later? No, right? It's just so all these things go together. But what I think is that organizations should really say, and there's a Canadian researcher named Dr. Joe Baker, and
Yes,
he's at
Joe has been on one of our
oh,
webinars.
perfect. So
Yeah.
Joe's done a lot of research into like the attributes of what determines long-term performance, right?
Mhm.
And things like that, right? And so I like that stuff. So as an organization, what do we value? right? Like what are the values of the organization? And then my coach of the year should be the person who really epitomizes those values.
Mm,
So talent development probably is one of them,
mhm,
right? But character is probably one of them, and integrity and all sorts of stuff. Because if the only thing that we value is did we win, well, now it's very easy to say, well, then of course I'm going to cheat or cut corners or
mhm,
dope or whatever because
mhm.
I'm only being judged on did I win.
Right, exactly. So this leads in nicely to my next question, which is about having a philosophy of coaching, and it's really important. And actually, just talking about coaching education again, like that's the thing that we start with usually in our coaching courses, is building that coach philosophy. So but it can be a challenge for coaches to combine the demands of their, lives, their job as parents and administrators and all that with whatever their personal philosophy of coaching is. 'Cause a lot of coaches, most coaches, especially in track, are just volunteers.
Hmm.
So what advice do you have for coaches to be able to, have a philosophy that they can really stay true to and that will be reflected in the team that they coach?
Well, I think first of all, it needs to come from you, right? So I'll tell you one of my I'll tell one of my favorite stories, and this was a coach who I think a lot of people know.
Mhm.
His name is Steve Kerr,
Yeah.
and Steve Kerr, Golden State Warriors, just Team USA for basketball this last Olympics, and Steve, um, and I tell the story in the book there too. So when he became the coach of the Golden State Warriors, he had never been a head coach before. And so he traveled around and he met with other, bunch of coaches, and one of them was the American football coach, Pete Carroll. And so he's in preseason with Pete and the music's blaring, he's watching all the interactions and they're doing all this stuff and he just sees the positive, the energy, the competitiveness. And so he meets with Pete after and he's like, "So how are you going to coach your team?" And Steve's like, "Well, what do you mean? Like offense we're going to run or defense?" He said, "No, you got the basketball piece. Like, what's it going to feel like for people to come to work?" And that has to come from you. And Pete's like, "This is what it took me 25 years to figure out." And
Mhm.
so he said, "Go home and come up with 10 things and then cross off the bottom six." And there should be like, three, four, maybe five things that give you energy, that fill your tank as a coach, right? That you're going to bring every day because that's the environment that you want it to be like. And I would also describe this like when I assess coaches, I'm like, would I want to be an athlete in that practice? Would I
Mhm.
want to be there? And if the answer is yes, it was probably a pretty darn good practice, right? So Steve comes back and he comes with four things, and they're still on his wall and the core of what he does. And the number one thing is joy. He's
Mhm.
like, we get to play a sport for a living. It's supposed to be fun
Yeah.
and competitiveness because we want to win a championship. And, he calls it compassion, but, family and the way we treat each other and protect the team and mindfulness, just being focused, but also visualization and meditation and anything else to prepare the inner for the inner game.
Mhm.
So that's what I think coaches, that's where you start. Like, what are the three or four most important things to John O'Sullivan, to Kyle, to you, John, whoever it is, right? Like that make me want to show up every day. Because if those are missing, you'll never be
Mhm.
fulfilled. And then you'll wonder, why am I not with my own family right now in these bunch of kids or whatever?
Yeah. So, so follow-up question, and I apologize because this wasn't on our list, but it made me think of
Oh,
it when
it's
you were
okay.
saying this.
I didn't memorize the list, I promise you that.
Okay. All right. Um, because so this makes a lot of sense, and for sure as a coach, you want to know what you want to get out of it. You want to know what kind of environment you want to have. But then I've also, in doing some work with teams that I've been on, creating the team values, there's a lot of value in having it come from the athletes themselves rather
Hmm.
than have the coach say, okay, this is how we're going to be. And if you get a bunch of people that are like really kind of just low-key people and you're like, we're going to have loud music and be pumped, and like it's not going to work. And
Hmm.
sometimes as a coach, you don't really pick the team, especially in track. Like they just
Hmm.
kind of come to you. So how do you balance like getting the athletes' input and combining the athletes' values with yours? And if there's a conflict there, like, and what do you do?
I think number one, if you've coached for a while, let's say you're part of a high school program or a club program where people have seen you, oftentimes what matters most to you, it transfers to your athletes. But I
Mhm.
think that's a super important point. So what I would do is I know what things matter most to me. And I might say, here's the three things, right?
Mhm.
And then I might say to our team, is there anything we should add,
Mhm.
right? Is there anything that you think that makes this team unique and
Mhm.
special? um, and that's their opportunity to add. Because
Mhm.
just because I join your track team doesn't mean that, that's an opportunity for me to kind of be more like all of you, not for all of
Mhm.
you to change everything you do to be like me,
Mhm.
right? And so that's sort of the terms and conditions they get for signing up. But then collectively, they get to say, you know what? We need a little more fun loving atmosphere here,
Mhm.
or we need more sportsmanship, or, you
Mhm.
know, we'd love to do more community service, right?
Mhm.
Service is something that we want to be known for as a team. So we want to add that. And I think that's great. I think
Mhm.
your thing that you're always doing is 3 to 5 is great. Once you
Mhm.
get past five, you
Mhm.
start to get into nice to haves instead of
Right.
this is how we do things here.
Mhm. Yeah, that's a great answer. That's a great answer. And it it kind of links to this next question about you make a distinction between standards and rules.
Hmm.
And I like this because I think, coaches are worried sometimes the trend in coaching is maybe like too soft. But talk a bit about standards and how this not so much rules, but standards can help athletes excel.
So first of all, the difference, right? And anyone who's
Mhm.
listening, and you have kids, I have kids, right? Kyle has kids, like,
Yeah.
my kids are teenagers. When you make rules, rules get broken.
Mhm.
Right? I'm going away
Mhm.
this weekend. I'm like, no one's allowed to come over to the house. Cross my
Mhm.
fingers. Right? So those
Yeah.
are the rules, right? And then I'm like, so those are the rules. Kids always push against rules. And
Mhm.
rules are, they hurt your flexibility, right? Now, there's good
Mhm.
things, right? Thank God airlines have rules, right?
Yeah.
But we also want airlines that go above the rules and have standards. So a standard is something that you aspire to, right? And I think highly functioning teams, don't have a lot of rules because then the coach ends up just being the police officer, enforcing the rules. But what they do have is high standards that people say, if you want to be part of this, aspire to this, right? Be this type of person when you come here. And so that's why I like that is, and it also gives me the flexibility as a coach to deal with the athlete as an individual. Because this kid, if I have a rule that says if you show up late, you don't race this weekend,
Yeah.
but this kid has a parent who works 2 jobs and 3 brothers and sisters and doesn't drive himself to practice, it's not his
Yeah.
fault that he's late.
Yeah.
So I don't need a rule for him that's going to
Yeah.
get him booted from every game.
Right. Yeah, we talked about that at our hockey coaches meeting, and one of our experienced coaches shared these is like the kids are not driving themselves to practice.
Yeah.
So if they're late, it's like it's probably not their fault. I mean,
Yeah.
maybe they're goofing around at home, but have that conversation with the family. Not don't just yell at the kid for being late because he's not
Yeah.
driving or
Yeah.
she.
Or the kid who drives from an hour away versus you live down the street. Like, don't
Yeah.
bitch that he got stuck in traffic, you know?
Mhm. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, okay, that's good. It's a really good distinction. And I think that can because it's always a challenge to be like, you wanna set boundaries and you want to respect them, but you also want to be reasonable and flexible. And standards is a good way of expressing that as something to kind of aspire to.
Yeah.
Um, Another thing that you talk about is you talk about coaching men versus coaching women.
Mm.
Can you explain what you learned in your experience? Because you've coached both teams, men's teams, women's teams, and for track people, because mostly track and field is it's a mixed team usually, the men and the women
Hmm.
are all together and that. So do you have any kind of insights onto that sort of team as well?
Well, it's funny because I sat down with a very close friend the other day who's a highly respected international coach who's coached in Olympics and World Cups, and he retired and he came out of retirement, and he's about to coach a 14-year-old girls team where half of them are in high school and not. I'm like, all right, get ready. Like everything you've learned, let me help you out here, right?
Yeah.
Um, so I want to say that first of all, like anything I talk about here is generalizations. Like all
Yeah.
all generalizations end at the individual level. But, you know, there's a couple of things, and I write in this chapter, right, of like, and it goes back to the research of the difference of how girls are socialized versus boys and how sports value certain things, which we might say are more boy oriented than girl oriented and things like that. But I think, one of the biggest things that I've learned, and I think about often, is that with males in general, when they compete, they bond,
Mm,
right? So when you go to battle together, you bond. And women need to bond in order to compete their very best. They need to know that I can go all out and my teammates still have my back. Um,
mm,
and so these are things like that I think we have to think about and be very, conscious if I'm coaching a lot of females of like really that togetherness and the bonding of the group is very important to them to get them to believe that we can go out and compete at the highest level. Men are, you know, there's a part in the book it says men are, you know, women are very good at weighing the odds of success and men are very good at ignoring them, right? So, there's that great scene in Jim Carrey movie, Dumb and Dumber where he asks the girl out and she
mm.
says 1 in a million. He's like, so you're saying there's a chance, right? Like, so, getting the girls, they'll, do I really want to compete? Because I don't think we can pull this off versus guys like, well, let's go for it. And if we get hammered, we get hammered and whatever. And
Yeah.
so, these are all just thinking about this as a coach
Mm,
that my own experience, especially if I'm a male and I didn't grow up with sisters or whatever, might not be what works best for
mhm,
these women in front of me, and vice versa. And it's not that one's right and one's wrong, or one's better or one's worse. They're just
yeah.
different.
Yeah, it makes sense. And then near the end of the book, you also talk about, when a new player comes in and kind of assigning that new player to kind of sort of the important culture makers on your team. And I feel like this is kind of related to so that they don't get kind of, eaten up or something, or there's like if there's cliques. So h- how does that work? And do you get pushback based on these sort of stereotypes or generalizations of the way teams work?
Well, in general, from a young age, girls tend to congregate in pairs and boys congregate in groups. This is the research on like kindergartners, right?
Hmm.
And so when you congregate in pairs, you have a best and a worst.
Hmm.
And if someone else joins the group, I might lose my friend, right?
Hmm.
When we congregate in groups, as long as I have a role in the group, so you can be the fast one and I could be the strong one and he's the funny one and he's the smart one. And
Hmm.
if you and I aren't getting along, no problem. I just move on to someone else in the group, right?
Hmm.
So it's easier to assimilate a guy into the group.
Hmm.
Like, are you going to help us win? Versus sometimes you bring in a girl into the group and it's like, well, whose place is she going to take? Whose
Hmm.
friend is she going to take?
Hmm.
But regardless, I think that first day experience when new people come to a team, especially an established team, is
Hmm.
so important. And so, regardless of whether it's men or women, boys or girls, I always assign someone, right? If I have a kid moves in from California, I'm like, I'll grab two cultural architects of the group and be like,
Hmm.
so and so just got here. He's your responsibility today. He's in your rondo. He's going to
Right.
be on your team.
Hmm.
Your job is to make him feel welcome today. Right.
Yeah.
And I think that means a lot for any kid who comes to a new group, a new town, a new place, that they feel like, wow,
Hmm.
I feel like I've already been part of this team. That's a
Hmm.
pretty cool thing versus no one talks to me, no one passes me the ball, no one
Right.
does anything. And then how do I even know as a coach if this kid's any good?
Hmm. Yeah. So I guess as a coach, you want to kind of you're obviously the athletes are kind of making the culture as a collection of individuals as they are, but you want to, try to kind of not put your thumb on the scales a bit, but just sort of engineer it a little bit so that there's always a space for, someone new coming in.
Yeah, and I mean, even when you talk to professional athletes who talk about coming into a new locker room or whatever,
Mhm.
they talk, who was your most influential teammate? They talk about the ones who made them feel welcome and went and
Yeah,
talked to
yeah,
them and
sure.
not like, oh, go sit at the table by
Yeah, yeah,
yourself.
sure, yeah.
So, and then when I feel that,
Mhm.
now I can perform, right?
Mhm.
My anxiety lowers, my cortisol lowers.
Mhm.
I'm not afraid to make mistakes, and I
Mhm.
feel a sense of belonging.
Yeah. Okay, so on this is good. The way the questions are ordered is a flow. So recently in 2023, Ontario did this a study of coaches, a lot of different questions and stuff. And Kyle, I don't know if you want to. It's in the doc if you want to grab and put the link in the chat for people if they want to check it out. But one of the things I wanted to touch on is that a third of coaches say that they're aware of hazing rituals in their club or an organization, and of that third of coaches who are aware, 82% feel that it's part of team building or that the way that it's done is like okay. So how do we like is this just nomenclature? Like maybe, the coach's idea of hazing is actually more, it's not really like what we think of as bad hazing, it's just team building, or like there's so many activities in your book that can bring a team together. So it's clear that going through some kind of group, stress, and I use that word not as a negative, can bring a team together. So how do we allow for this kind of thing to happen without it falling into a kind of, hazing territory?
Yeah, I mean, I guess a lot of that would be because I haven't seen the study, but like
Mhm.
how is someone defining hazing, right?
Yeah.
Doing things as a group together that puts the group under stress that helps them expose weaknesses and things like that, like maybe the Navy SEALs do. That's not hazing,
Mhm.
right? As we might imagine it, where I would say hazing is closer to like bullying. It's like the
Yeah.
group forcing people and using their power against individuals, whether it's to make them drink or do certain things,
Mhm.
and that's totally destructive. Now, like
Mhm.
I think, well, one of my things with the teams that I work with, and I have a bunch of university teams, and I say, you can take two approaches as an upperclassman. You can say, okay, here come the new players. Let's just dump all over them.
Mhm.
But what happens in the moment of the game when you need that kid to make a free throw or a
Mhm.
penalty kick or
Mhm.
something, and all they've been is dumped on by you all year long? Do you think they're going to be in their best state to make it?
Mhm.
Or as a leadership group in this team, you can look at leadership as an opportunity to serve your teammates, right? How can I give? And so I will pick up the balls. I'll pick up the cones. Now it's not only my job, but if I'm the team captain and
Mhm.
I'm the All-American and I'm the first one out there cleaning up after practice and picking up the water
Mhm.
cups and whatever,
Yeah.
then I would think the freshman would be like, I better do that too,
Yeah.
right? And I think that's a good thing. So so without having read the study, I would just say, you know, the teams with where the senior leaders are givers and not getters, and where they're servants and not
Mhm.
expected to be served, are
Mhm.
far stronger teams and will most likely get
Mhm.
more out of new athletes than the ones who say, well, it's just something that you have to go through.
Mhm. Yeah. It makes me think of when I was in high school. I had a teacher who would always say to us, and it was kind of like, and I can talk about this afterwards, like a little saying. He'd say, pick up the tray. And what he meant was like at lunchtime in the cafeteria, when you're done with your lunch, take the tray back. And if you see a stray tray, just go pick up the tray. But sir, it
Yeah,
wasn't my tray. Pick up the tray.
yeah,
Just pick up the tray. Because then you show that like you're responsible for the whole area, the whole team, the whole school, whatever it is. Like it's ownership. It brings
right.
ownership to the team.
Right, because if I'm
Yeah.
the one right in, if I'm playing hockey and I'm not the one who makes the bad pass, I don't just go, well, that's a goal.
Yeah.
I tidy up for my teammate, right? Well, build habits, get reps. Yeah.
Yeah. So you wrote about the one moment, and you said you had your one moment with someone named Brother Jeff. Do you think such a moment could happen today, or would Brother Jeff be immediately suspended? Like, what?
Okay.
Tell us the
Well,
story of
I'll
Brother
tell the
Jeff.
story
Yeah.
so people have context. So, and I tell this story a lot when I give talks. So, Brother Jeff was my high school English teacher, and and I use this in this idea of the rule of one. Like one person, one comment, one time can change your life, right? And so
Mhm.
Brother Jeff was a teacher, and in I think I was 11th grade, and I got a paper back, and it had one of those big fat red F's on it. And I said, Brother Jeff, there's no way this paper is an F. Like that's I know this paper is better than other people's. And he was like,
Mhm.
John, I didn't give you an F based on what she could write or he could write.
Mhm.
It's based on what you're capable of, and this is terrible. You put no effort into this,
Mhm.
and then he, took my books and threw them out the third story window and said, "Get out of my class and don't come back until you're willing to give me your best effort, John, because you're a great writer." Right? And that moment stuck with me. And it stuck with me because it was emotional, it was poignant. I was pissed off in the moment. Um, but I went home and, complained, and my dad said was he right? I'm like, well, yeah. And he's like, well, then what are you complaining about? Like, he's just telling you the truth, man.
Yeah.
It's because he cares about you. Now, Brother Jeff didn't do this the first day of class. He
Mhm.
was a teacher that I had known for a couple years. We were close. So there was a lot that was one of those withdrawals from the trust bank,
Mhm.
right? Um, and so, and so I tell the story because, yeah, I don't know that you get away with that now. And in the moment, you could at a Catholic school in New York in the 80s. That was probably
Yeah.
acceptable behavior to an extent,
Yeah.
right? But there's other ways that you can be really intentional about your words and your actions with someone that's going to stick with an athlete. And oftentimes you don't remember. And that's, Brother Jeff years later when we talked about it, he doesn't remember doing that, right? But he
Yeah.
changed my life.
Yeah.
And so this is the thing as a coach that your words matter and your influence matters.
And good for your dad too, because I think a parent today might be like calling the school straight away,
100%.
rather than, helping you, learn something out of that moment.
And then the lessons lost,
Yeah.
right? And then the lessons lost. And I wrote a letter today to my daughter who's a freshman at university, right?
Mm.
And she's just gone. She left yesterday for school.
Mm.
And so I sent this letter.
Is it a
And
letter, like you hand wrote it and you mailed it, or did you?
I typed it and signed it and everything, but I
Okay.
typed it out. Yeah, and I had to send her. I wanted to be the first one that she got mail from,
Yeah.
right, when she went to college. So I wrote this letter and I said, things are going to be hard. Like life is going to be hard, right? And there's going to be challenging. And you know, you've done amazing work in school and sport and all these sort of things to get to a certain place. And everyone wants what you have, but no one
Mm.
wants to do the work to get there, right?
Uh,
And so the challenges academically and socially and everything like that are going to be there. And I said, I think your mom and I, we did our best to put you in as many challenging situations as possible
mm,
so that you can handle this on your own. And I
mm,
think you're ready for this, and you can always pick up the phone, you can always call. But there was a lot of moments where with my kids, like
mm,
you let them fail, you let them struggle, you let them come and bitch about a coach or a teacher and
mm,
well, they're right. you know.
yeah.
So I think it's important,
Yeah.
as a parent, as a coach, whatever you do.
Yeah, for sure. So just we're about 10 minutes from the end. I don't see any questions yet, but if people have questions, put them in. Um, One thing you have there, I think it's the title of one of your chapters. It says "You are enough."
Mm,
And one thing I discovered coaching young athletes is that they put enough pressure on themselves. So the coach, like, it would be very rare for me to need to add additional pressure. And frankly, the times that I've done that have been mistakes, coaching mistakes.
mhm.
Um, and so what are some strategies for coaches to kind of be able to recognize when, when this is the case, and instead of the instinct to like put more pressure, but actually help let some air out and alleviate that pressure?
I mean, I think that's the dance, right? You're always like, is this where I push? Is this where I pull back? And recognizing that, especially in moments of failure or you've lost or things like
Mhm.
that.
Mhm.
And the higher the level of sport, the more scrutiny there is. And
Mhm.
sadly, these days with Twitter or whatever we're calling it this week and Instagram and, social media, it's like everyone has a platform to tell you how much you suck or how you let down their team or
Mhm.
racially abuse you or sexual, gender abuse, whatever it is, right?
Mhm.
And so, like so many athletes, it's helping them recognize that those voices don't matter,
Mhm.
right? One of my favorite quotes is Dr. Seuss, and he says, "The people who mind don't matter, and the people who matter don't mind," right? And I always say that to kids
Mhm.
because you have athletes who 20 minutes left and the team isn't doing well, they're thinking about what is social media saying about me right now? I missed a penalty kick. I
Mhm.
missed three breakaways. I,
Mhm.
ran poorly. Whatever it is, right? And so I
Yeah.
think that's our thing, right? Is like we're trying to teach kids like we've done the work. You are enough,
Mhm.
right? And your worth as a human being has nothing to do with whether you win or lose tomorrow or
Mhm.
tonight,
Mhm.
right? That is beyond it. And as a coach and
Mhm.
hopefully as a parent, that's what we're constantly showing our athletes.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. Um, all right, we made it through most of the questions. I'm happy. This has been such a rich
Yeah.
discussion. I have another kind of question here, kind of
Yeah.
fun question. Like you've got this, you are enough, and I am excited. I love watching you play, which is the thing that you've come up with for parents to say, after the game or whatever. And that's the thing. That's the only thing. Don't say
Mhm.
anything else. How do you come up with these little aphorisms, these little sayings? Like, do you think about it hard, or they just come to you, or?
Well, number one, so the book that we've been going through, Every Moment Matters, right? That was wrote that after a lot of research and 150 podcast episodes. So that was a lot of gems from other coaches and things like that came up with that. And I like chapters, and all the chapters in the book begin with a story and things like that so I just, I want when I write a book and like our new book as well, and Jerry and I did a book last year called Champion Teammate. I like people to open the table of contents and go, oh, yeah, I want to read that chapter, right? And so, so like probably my favorite chapter name in there was one from Belgian soccer, and it was called Great on Paper and Bleep on Grass.
Yeah.
And that's,
Yeah.
you know, I think that's coaching sometimes. Things look awesome on paper, in a course, in our book, and then
Yeah.
you go try it and it's a disaster.
Mhm.
And that's coaching as well.
Yeah. Cool. Well, this webinar was great on paper, and it was great out here on the grass.
Awesome.
So I'm really excited that we got to talk to you, John. Really so many valuable insights. I encourage people to check out. Like I said, Every Moment Matters was the book that I read twice. Um, the Champion Teammate, Changing the Game, and then Giving New Sport Back to Our Kids, and the latest one, The Champion Sports Parent, which is coming out October 1st. So thank you again, John. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, and then just go to the changeofthegameproject.com. That's kind of the
Yes,
mothership
yes,
for stuff. That's where the Way of Champions podcast there's almost 400 episodes of that. So if you can't
yeah,
find something there, I probably can't help you.
that's it. Yeah, so if you want more John O'Sullivan, there's like 400 episodes of it there. So that's
Yeah.
great. Well, thank you so much, and thanks everybody for coming. And yeah, we'll have this up on YouTube real soon. So thanks again. Have a good night, everyone.
Bye everyone. Thank you.
Bye.